Art is art and it doesn't have anything called right or wrong. So, in that perspective, every art is right. But to somebody who is viewing an artwork, some artworks look more right compared to others because of the visual appeal. Today, I'll discuss 30 such aspects what an watercolor artist can do to improve the quality of visual appeal and quality of art as such. Hello, friends. I am Torit Mato, and you are watching Art and Purulia. These tips are very basic tips, but often we don't know because nobody told us, or just simply we don't give importance to these and just ignore. For painting anything, the basic three stages are pre-painting stage, that is preparation, then the stage of execution, that is painting the painting, and lastly post-painting stage, that is what after we have completed the painting. I'll talk of the tips sequentially. Let's come to pre-painting stage. First and foremost is learn to draw. Knowing how to draw before you start painting definitely helps. Some may argue it is not necessary to know how to draw well in order to be a good artist, but I'll say it helps. You learn a lot about lines, shapes, proportions, perspectives, lights and shadows, composition, and many other aspects of visual representation which can improve your art. Secondly, use good quality materials. The basic materials you require are paints, brushes, and paper. For paints, go for at least student quality. If you can't afford, artist quality. But don't go for the cheap hobby grade ones. They are really awful and you cannot expect good results from those paints. Paper is equally important. Often we ignore that. Always paint on thick watercolor papers only. You are sure to get disappointed with thin printer papers or papers torn out of your notebook. Also, you should have at least one or two good quality sable brushes which can hold a lot of water and paint, and the brush can also come to a pointed tip if you require for fine works. A related tip is don't always buy sets of paints or brushes. You may not need all of them. In fact, some of them you may never use. It may appear cheap in the beginning, but you must understand quality doesn't come cheap. If you are buying for the first time, you may like to buy a set, but later on it makes sense to buy only those paints or those brushes which you actually require. It saves money and also saves wastage. Next step is learn and practice the basics of color and the techniques of watercolor painting, such as color concepts and techniques like how to lay flat and variegated washes and how to use the brushes, etc. That way, you learn to gain more control over the water and the paints. Use a soft pencil or a watercolor pencil for drawing the outlines. And if drawn using a pencil, erase the lines as you progress painting, especially the lighter paint areas, because once you layer it with watercolor, you will not be able to erase without removing the color also. Next step is do not use hard pencil or use too much of pressure on the paper for drawing outlines. This creates a dent on the paper which retains the pigment and a dark line is generated along those lines. Always tape your paper or use a block. Preferably use stretched paper that will make the paper less bumpy while painting. Next is be satisfied with initial drawing before you start painting. If you go wrong in proportions, angles and perspectives, that will affect the whole painting. So make sure your outline is correctly drawn before you start painting. And try and keep the composition simple. Avoid the complicated features in your reference photograph or scene so that the painting becomes much easier for you. Arrange similar colors together on your palette. Also, if you have too many paints, keep the similar types in one box for finding them easily and also for comparison. Some of them may be transparent and some a bit opaque. Also, some may be cool and some warm, some granulating and some non granulating, some staining and some non staining. So, similar colors also have different properties. So, you should be able to understand and use them as required. And it makes it easier to choose and mix if you have them bunched together. Use two or three water containers instead of just one. Out of them, one you can use for washing the dirty brushes and the other for adding clean water to paints. If you use the same dirty water for mixing paints, you will definitely get dirty paints and they will be dull and you'll lose out on the transparency of the watercolor paints. Try the color and the technique on a different paper before you put it on the actual painting. This will avoid spoiling your painting because of wrong use of techniques or wrong paint, wrong shade. And for that purpose, keep a small piece of paper on the side to try it out. Keep black and white colors away, especially if you're a beginner. Using white with any other color makes the color opaque and muddy, and it changes the color. It becomes a bit pastel like color. So avoid it. Preserve the white of the paper to depict white. There are several methods for preserving white. And to make a paint lighter, simply add water and not white. Though there are tricks of using white paint to depict highlights, it can be used by an experienced artist. So better avoid it as a beginner. Normal black which you get in the tube is too black and flat, and your painting ultimately becomes very flat. Nothing in nature is actually flat. So instead, if you want a very dark shade, mix a warm or cold dark tone as required to match the mood of the painting. Now let's come to the actual painting stage. But before that, I'll request you to consider subscribing my channel. If you haven't subscribed already, you will definitely not regret it because you will get good tips for painting. And also you can hit the notification icon so that you get notified whenever a new video is posted. Now, once you have prepared the materials and you have drawn the outlines properly and comfortably seated in a well ventilated and well lit room or place, let's start painting. Work from light to dark. Because of the transparent nature of the watercolors, you cannot paint light colors over dark colors. So plan it out properly to build layers slowly from light shades to dark shades. Do not rest or rub your hand or fingers on the paper. Our hands generally have some oils, some are which are natural oils, and also if you have touched something, those will be in your hands that can damage the paper. Use a brush to clean the paper if required. That is, suppose if you have erased something and you want to remove it from the paper, use a soft brush to remove them instead of your hand. And if you are required to rest the fingers for painting the details, use a hand towel which should be clean again, or a paper towel for the purpose. In case of a landscape, do the background first because that is the one which is farthest. So paint from the background to the foreground, such as sky. Other objects like trees, houses, and all those will come on top of the sky. So if you're thinking of painting the sky later on, it won't work out. In that process, some of the sky which you have painted earlier as a background will peek through the leaves and branches of the trees and it will look proper. Use a rag or paper towel to control the water on the brush. So before you put the brush on the paper, you dab it on the cloth or the paper to remove some of the excess water or paint, and thereafter apply the paint. That will be much more easy and less messy. Also, with a dry brush, you can lift up paint or water very easily, and you can create a dry brush by removing the excess water on the cloth. Do not allow the paints or water to form puddles on your paper, especially on plain areas such as sky or meadows or flower petals. The accumulation of water will not allow even drying, so there will be cauliflowers or backgrounds which are undesired effects. Unless, of course, you are intentionally creating them. The next step is use the largest brush you can manage. The idea is very simple. A large brush holds large amount of paints that allows quick painting and less reloading. A small brush will require a lot of reloading and thus difficult to achieve smooth finish. By the time you finish applying the whole area, the earlier areas may be already dry, so it will not give an even wash. Do not keep the brushes standing in the water jar. It may cause serious damage to the brushes. You will find fish hook like shapes at the tip of your bristles, and then the whole brush becomes useless until unless you start cutting the tips to find a point, and it will never achieve the initial shape. So instead, you can lay the brushes flat or slanting on the table or a stand, and if you feel it can be messy, keep a towel or a newspaper underneath. Let a layer dry before applying another layer. It makes the process less messy and makes crisp edges where required. Use an old brush or stiff acrylic brushes for mixing. It will make the process easy and save the watercolor brush from getting damaged. Apply the brush strokes in the direction the object grows or the contour of the object. Objects such as trees, branches, hair, leaves, petals, etc. It is easier and more natural if painted from base to the tip. Moreover, if painted as the contour of the object, such as flat for a wall and curved in case of tree trunks, it will make the painting more realistic. Mix the paints on the paper. It makes better effect if the paints are allowed to mix on the paper and rather than use a pre-mixed color from the palette. A pre-mixed color from the palette will give you a flat finish, whereas if the paints mix on the paper, they run onto each other and create beautiful effects. Add simple tools like sponges, toothbrush, and earbuds in your drawing tools inventory. They can be very handy in making textures for trees, flowers, and also for splattering. Initially, paint with limited palette. What it means is that use only a few colors in a painting to keep it simple. You also get a good idea of mixing and how the paints behave with one another. Do not use masking fluid for large areas. It can tear the paper or can be very messy while removing it. Use masking fluid with caution and use for very small areas and intricate details only. For fine details, consider using watercolor pencils. They can make things quite easy, but make sure that it goes well with the background. Avoid using ink along with watercolor. Most liquid watercolor, which is ink, are actually dyes and they can stain the paper quite easily. So, initial washes are not at all recommended. You may use inks for accentuating certain shades while finishing, and these inks also stain your palette, so be careful. Do not abandon a painting in between. See, every painting goes through an ugly stage where you may feel it's not going as planned and it lacks contrasts and details, and you need to go through this and finish it. At the end, you'll realize it has come out well. Moreover, when you feel it is finished, do not overdo it. There is one good rule here: it's better to stop just before you think the artwork is finished rather than overworking it. Leaving it completed but unfinished will give the viewer room to imagine the incomplete bits and perceive the picture as more interesting and appealing. In the post painting stage, one thing that comes to my mind is clean your palette and workplace after you've finished painting. Many watercolor artists will not agree with me in this again, and they believe that there is no point clearing a watercolor palette. In fact, the mix makes it more homogeneous and shades are easily available if it is unclean. But I feel it otherwise. Watercolor strength is its transparency. By mixing and overmixing, we tend to lose it and often land up making mud. So it's always a good idea to start fresh with clean palette, clean and fresh paints. So clean up the mixing area and the top layers of the paints that have gone dirty once you've finished painting one session, and that itself will do. Lastly, I want to give an additional tip: protect your painting from direct sunlight, moisture, or accidental splash of water by framing it under a glass or transparent cellophane papers or albums. Do not keep your watercolor paintings lying loose on the table, you may accidentally damage them. That brings us to end of all these points which I could recollect offhand. Thanks a lot, friends, for patiently listening to the tips. Stay healthy and safe. See you.